The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's Corner Cafe like angry fists demanding entry. Marcus Chen wiped down the counter for the third time in 10 minutes, his eyes drifting to the clock above the espresso machine. 11:37 p.m. Most sensible people were home, warm and dry, probably watching late-night television or reading before bed. But Marcus wasn't most people. He kept his small cafe open until midnight every weeknight, not because the business demanded it, but because he understood loneliness. In a city of 8 million souls, sometimes the most crowded place could feel like the emptiest. His cafe had become an unofficial sanctuary for night shift workers, insomniacs, and anyone else who needed a warm place to exist without judgment. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus looked up expecting to see Janet, the night nurse from St. Mary's, who usually stopped by for her regular double-shot Americano. Instead, a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, rain dripping from what appeared to be an oversized coat. As the stranger stepped into the warm light of the cafe, Marcus had to suppress a sharp intake of breath. The being before him was definitely not human, though it walked upright on 2 legs. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, with scales that shifted between deep emerald and midnight blue, depending on how the light caught them. Its head was distinctly draconic, complete with elegant horns that curved back from its skull and eyes that glowed with an inner amber fire. What struck Marcus most wasn't the alien's imposing presence, but the way it moved. There was something profoundly weary about its posture, a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. The alien's magnificent head was slightly bowed, and its powerful shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight that threatened to crush even its considerable frame. The creature approached the counter slowly, each step deliberate and careful, as if it was concentrating on not breaking something fragile. When it reached the counter, it looked down at Marcus with those burning amber eyes, and for a moment neither spoke. Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Welcome to Murphy's. What can I get for you?" The alien's head tilted slightly, and when it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder rolling across mountains. "I apologize if my presence disturbs you. I was not certain if your establishment would—" It paused, searching for words. "Accommodate someone of my nature." Marcus had encountered his share of unusual customers over the years. College students with bright purple hair, artists covered in paint splatters, business executives still wearing yesterday's clothes after all-night meetings. But he'd never served anyone from another species. Still, the fundamental rule of hospitality remained the same. "Everyone's welcome here," Marcus said simply, "as long as you're not planning to cause trouble and you look like you could use some caffeine. Coffee?" Something flickered across the alien's features that might have been surprise. "You are remarkably calm about my appearance." Marcus shrugged, reaching for a large cup. "I've learned that appearances don't tell you much about a person. Besides, you look tired, and I've got good coffee." "Seems like a simple equation to me." He paused, studying the alien's face. "Though I have to ask, do you actually drink coffee? I mean, is it safe for your biology?" The dragon-like being's mouth curved upward slightly, revealing what Marcus hoped was a smile rather than a threat display. "Yes, we are quite compatible with what you call coffee. In fact, the caffeine compound is remarkably similar to a stimulant found on my homeworld." "Great. How do you like it?" "I am unfamiliar with the variations available." Marcus nodded and began working. "Trust me on this one. You look like someone who's had a hell of a day." He started the espresso machine, the familiar hiss and gurgle filling the comfortable silence. "I'm Marcus, by the way. This is my place." "I am—" The alien paused, seeming to consider something. "You may call me Zeth." As Marcus prepared the drink, he found himself glancing at his unusual customer. Zeth had chosen a table in the corner, as far from the windows as possible, and sat with his back to the wall. Despite his size and obviously powerful physique, he made himself as small as possible, as if trying not to take up space in the world. Marcus had seen that posture before, usually in people carrying enormous stress or grief. He'd learned to recognize the signs during his late father's final months, when the weight of terminal illness had transformed a once vibrant man into someone who seemed to be apologizing for still existing. The espresso machine finished its work, and Marcus crafted something he'd been experimenting with, a drink that balanced the bitter edge of a double shot with rich cream and just a hint of vanilla. He added a touch of cinnamon. Something about Zeth's coloring suggested he might appreciate the warm spice. He walked over to the corner table and set the cup down carefully. House special. On the house for a first-time customer. Zeth looked up at him with those extraordinary eyes. You are kind. This is not expected. It's just coffee, Marcus replied, settling into the chair across from him without being invited. Something told him this being needed company more than he needed solitude. Besides, looks like you've got something heavy on your mind. Sometimes talking to a stranger helps. The alien carefully lifted the cup with hands that ended in what appeared to be retractable claws. He took a cautious sip and his eyes widened slightly. This is exceptional. The flavor profile is remarkably complex. Marcus grinned. Thanks. I've been working on that one for a while. He leaned back in his chair, studying Zeth's face. So, what brings you to Earth? Tourism? Business? Fleeing intergalactic tax collectors? That last comment earned him another of those careful smiles. You speak as if meeting beings from other worlds is a common occurrence for you. First time, actually. But I figure the basic principles of conversation remain the same regardless of species. People usually end up in coffee shops at midnight for one of three reasons. They're working late, they can't sleep, or they're trying to avoid going home to whatever's waiting for them there. Zeth took another sip of coffee, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked windows. Your insight is unexpectedly accurate. He was quiet for a long moment. I find myself in the unusual position of having nowhere I wish to be. Rough day at work? You could say that. Zeth's voice carried a note of bitter humor. I made a decision today that will affect billions of lives, perhaps trillions, and I am no longer certain it was the correct decision. Marcus whistled low. That's a hell of a workload. What do you do? Again that pause, as if Zeth was weighing how much truth to reveal. I am responsible for the welfare of many people. Today I was forced to choose between two courses of action, both of which will result in suffering. I chose what I believed would result in the least harm, but he gestured helplessly with one scaled hand. But you'll never know if you were right. Precisely. Marcus had never faced decisions on the scale Zeth was describing. But he understood the weight of impossible choices. When his father was dying, he'd faced the decision of whether to keep the cafe open or spend those final months entirely at his father's side. He'd chosen to maintain the business, believing his father would want him to secure his future. His father had died on a Tuesday afternoon while Marcus was serving coffee to strangers. You want to know something I learned the hard way? Marcus said finally. Perfect decisions don't exist. There's just doing the best you can with the information you have at the time, and then living with the consequences. Zeth's amber eyes fixed on him with sudden intensity. And if the consequences involve the deaths of millions, then you carry that weight. And you make sure the next decision is better informed. Marcus refilled Zeth's cup from the pot he'd brought over. But beating yourself up over a choice you've already made doesn't help anyone, especially not the people depending on you to keep making decisions. Your species possesses wisdom that my advisors seem to lack. Zeth murmured. Or maybe I just have the luxury of not knowing what you're really dealing with. Marcus grinned. Sometimes ignorance makes philosophy easier. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of rain against the windows creating a cocoon of intimacy in the small cafe. Marcus found himself studying his unusual companion, noting the way Zeth's posture had gradually relaxed, the rigid line of his shoulders softening as he cradled the warm cup between his hands. "May I ask you something?" Zeth said eventually. "Shoot. Why do you keep this establishment open so late? The financial return cannot justify the expense." Marcus considered the question. "You ever notice how the world gets quiet after midnight? Not silent, just quieter. The urgent stuff is done, the important stuff is waiting until tomorrow, and what's left is just people trying to get through the night. Sometimes they need a place to do that. You provide sanctuary. I provide coffee. The sanctuary part just sort of happened." Marcus glanced around his cafe, taking in the mismatched furniture, the local artwork covering the walls, the small shelf of books that customers had left behind over the years. "My dad used to say that feeding people was the most basic form of taking care of each other. Didn't matter if it was a 5-course meal or a cup of coffee, the act was the same." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was. Cancer got him 2 years ago." Marcus was surprised to hear himself volunteer that information. He usually didn't talk about his father with customers, but something about Zeth invited confidence. "He built this place from nothing, turned it into something that mattered to the neighborhood. I'm just trying to keep that going." Zeth nodded slowly. "Legacy is a heavy responsibility." "Yeah, but it's also a privilege. Not everyone gets to continue something meaningful that someone else started." Marcus looked at his companion. "I'm guessing you know something about that kind of pressure." "More than I care to admit." Zeth finished his coffee and carefully set the cup down. "Your father would be proud of what you have accomplished here. This place radiates the kind of warmth that cannot be manufactured or faked." "Thanks. That means a lot." Zeth rose from his chair, moving with that same careful deliberation. "I should not impose upon your hospitality any longer." "You're not imposing. But if you need to go, you need to go." Marcus stood as well. "The offer stands, though. Midnight coffee for anyone who needs it." The alien reached into what Marcus now realized was some kind of sophisticated garment rather than a simple coat. He withdrew what appeared to be a small metallic disc. "I would like to compensate you for your kindness." "Just the coffee's fine. Like I said, first cup's on the house." Zeth placed the disc on the table anyway. "Please, it would honor me if you would accept this." Marcus picked up the disc, surprised by its weight and the way it seemed to warm to his touch. It was covered in intricate symbols that shifted and flowed like living things. "What is it?" "Consider it a token of appreciation from someone who needed reminded that kindness exists in the universe." Before Marcus could respond, Zeth was moving toward the door with that same measured pace. He paused at the threshold, rain visible beyond the glass. "Marcus of Murphy's Corner Cafe," he said formally. "Tonight you have provided more than coffee to a weary traveler. You have reminded me that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources. Take care of yourself, Zeth. Try to get some sleep." The alien's smile was warmer this time, less guarded. "I shall endeavor to do so. Perhaps when next I face an impossible decision, I will remember that imperfect choices made with good intentions are still choices worth making." And with that, he stepped back into the rain and disappeared into the night, leaving Marcus alone with the lingering scent of storm and the strange disc warming in his palm. Marcus looked down at the metallic object, its symbols continuing their hypnotic dance across its surface. Whatever it was clearly valuable. far more valuable than a cup of coffee. He should probably chase after Zeth and return it. Instead, he found himself pocketing the disc and beginning his closing routine. Something told him that refusing Zeth's gift would have been more insulting than accepting it. Besides, the alien had seemed like he needed to give something back to balance the scales of the interaction. As Marcus turned off the lights and locked up the cafe, he reflected on the strange encounter. In all his years of late-night hospitality, he'd never had a customer quite like Zeth. There had been something almost regal about the way the alien carried himself, a bearing that suggested he was accustomed to deference and respect. Yet he'd also seemed profoundly alone, burdened by responsibilities that Marcus couldn't even imagine. Whatever decisions Zeth was wrestling with, they were clearly of enormous consequence. Marcus hoped his simple advice had provided some comfort, even if it couldn't solve the alien's larger problems. Walking home through the rain-soaked streets, Marcus found himself wondering if he'd ever see Zeth again. Somehow, he suspected he would. There had been something unfinished about their conversation, as if it was the beginning of something rather than a complete interaction. He pulled his jacket tighter against the rain and quickened his pace, eager to get home and examine the strange disc more carefully. Whatever it was, it represented a connection to something larger than his small cafe and quiet life. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a stirring of excitement about what tomorrow might bring. 3 days passed before Marcus saw the news report that changed everything. He was preparing for the morning rush, grinding coffee beans and arranging pastries in the display case, when the emergency broadcast interrupted the usual morning talk show. This is Channel 7 News with breaking coverage of what appears to be first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. We're receiving reports from government sources that alien vessels have appeared in orbit around major population centers worldwide. Marcus dropped the bag of coffee beans he'd been holding, dark roast scattering across the floor as he stared at the television mounted in the corner. The screen showed shaky footage of massive ships hanging in the sky above New York, London, Tokyo, and dozens of other cities. The vessels were elegant and imposing, their surfaces seeming to shift between colors in a pattern that reminded Marcus of something familiar. According to preliminary reports from the White House, the alien fleet is requesting diplomatic contact with Earth's leadership. No hostile actions have been detected, but military forces worldwide have been placed on high alert. The camera cut to a press conference where a tired-looking government official was fielding questions from dozens of reporters. We can confirm that we have received communications from the alien fleet. The message appears to be a formal request for diplomatic engagement. We are working with international partners to coordinate an appropriate response. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered amber eyes and scales that shifted from emerald to midnight blue. The coloring of the ships matched Zeth's skin almost exactly. It couldn't be a coincidence. The alien communications have been translated with surprising ease, the official continued. They appear to speak multiple human languages fluently, which suggests they have been observing our planet for some time. The entity identifying itself as the fleet commander has requested a meeting with Earth's primary leadership within the next 48 hours. A reporter shouted a question over the din. Can you tell us anything about what these aliens look like? Are they hostile? Based on our limited communications, they appear to be a reptilian species of considerable intelligence. As for their intentions, they have made no hostile demands and have explicitly stated they come in peace. However, we are taking all necessary precautions. Marcus slowly sank into a chair, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Zeth's comment about decisions affecting billions of lives, his obvious exhaustion and the weight of responsibility he carried, the formal way he'd spoken about legacy and wisdom. Marcus had served coffee to someone involved in first contact, possibly someone in command of the alien fleet itself. The metallic disc Zeth had given him suddenly felt heavy in his pocket, where he'd been carrying it for 3 days. He'd examined it extensively, marveling at the way its symbols seemed to move and shift, but he'd assumed it was simply advanced alien technology, perhaps a form of currency or identification. Now he wondered if it might be something far more significant. The news coverage continued throughout the morning, providing updates every few minutes but little new information. The alien fleet remained in position, making no aggressive moves but also showing no signs of departure. Government officials assured the public that negotiations were proceeding, but their obvious nervousness suggested they were flying blind. Marcus went through the motions of serving his regular customers, but his mind was elsewhere. Mrs. Patterson wanted her usual cappuccino extra hot, and Steve from the accounting firm ordered his daily breakfast sandwich. But Marcus barely registered their presence. His thoughts kept returning to that night 3 days ago, replaying every word of his conversation with Zeth. Around midday, when the lunch crowd had thinned out, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane just a week earlier. He called his part-time employee Jenny and asked her to cover the rest of his shift, then headed home to retrieve the disc and figure out how to contact someone in the government who might listen to his story. The problem, he quickly discovered, was that everyone wanted to talk to the government about the aliens. Phone lines were jammed, government websites were crashing under the load of traffic, and local police stations were overwhelmed with calls from people claiming everything from alien abduction to possession of extraterrestrial artifacts. Marcus spent hours trying to reach anyone, who might take his story seriously. He called the FBI, the State Department, even his congressman's office. Each time, he was told that all alien-related reports needed to go through official channels, which were currently experiencing unprecedented volume. By evening, frustration was giving way to desperation. The news reports were becoming more urgent, with government officials hinting at a deadline for diplomatic response. Military analysts were openly speculating about the aliens' capabilities, noting that their ships showed technology far beyond human understanding. That's when Marcus remembered something Zeth had said about providing sanctuary. The alien had been carrying an enormous burden that night, seeking a place to think and rest before making crucial decisions. If Zeth really was connected to the fleet, and if those decisions involved Earth's fate, then maybe he needed that sanctuary again. Marcus closed the cafe early and spent the evening preparing. He made fresh coffee, arranged comfortable seating, and dimmed the harsh overhead lights in favor of the warmer table lamps. If Zeth returned, seeking the same quiet refuge he'd found before, Marcus wanted to be ready. He waited until well past midnight, long after his usual closing time. But the cafe remained empty, except for the occasional pedestrian hurrying past the rain-streaked windows. Finally, around 1:30 a.m., Marcus admitted defeat and began his closing routine. He was wiping down the espresso machine when the bell above the door chimed softly. Marcus turned around, expecting to see a late-night drunk or someone seeking shelter from the rain. Instead, Zeth stood in the doorway exactly as he had 3 nights before, water dripping from his coat and exhaustion written in every line of his powerful frame. "The sanctuary remains open?" Zeth asked quietly. "Always," Marcus replied, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Same corner table?" Zeth nodded and moved to his previous spot while Marcus prepared coffee, with hands that trembled slightly from excitement and nervousness. The alien's presence felt different this time, more intense somehow, as if the weight he carried had grown exponentially heavier. Marcus brought over the coffee and settled into the same chair he'd occupied before. For a moment, neither spoke, the comfortable ritual of their previous encounter providing a framework for this much more complicated meeting. "I've been watching the news," Marcus said finally. "Quite a fleet you've got up there." Zeth's amber eyes met his over the rim of the coffee cup. "You have made the connection. Took me a while, but yeah, though I'm guessing you're not just any member of the crew." "No, Zeth said simply. I am not. Marcus waited, sensing that pushing for more information would be counterproductive. Instead, he refilled Zeth's cup and settled back to listen. 3 nights ago, you asked me what I did for work, Zeth said eventually. I told you I was responsible for the welfare of many people. That was an incomplete answer. How incomplete? I am the Emperor of the Draconic Coalition, a confederation of 12 star systems containing approximately 4 billion sentient beings. Zeth's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather. The fleet currently orbiting your planet represents the combined military might of our civilization. Marcus set down his coffee cup carefully, needing a moment to process this revelation. So when you said your decisions affect billions of lives, I meant it quite literally. Zeth took another sip of coffee. The choice I was wrestling with that night was whether to make contact with humanity or to classify your species as too dangerous for diplomatic engagement. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. And if you'd decided we were too dangerous, your planet would have been quarantined indefinitely. No contact, no technological exchange, no membership in the galactic community. Your species would have been left to develop in isolation, cut off from the broader universe until such time as you either achieved enlightenment or destroyed yourselves. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. That's quite a decision. Indeed, and one I very nearly made differently. Zeth leaned forward slightly. My military advisors recommended quarantine. My diplomatic corps suggested limited observation. My scientific council argued for careful, controlled contact. Each faction presented compelling arguments supported by detailed analyses and historical precedent. But you chose full contact. Because a human in a small cafe reminded me that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources and that imperfect choices made with good intentions are still choices worth making. Zeth's smile was warmer than any Marcus had seen from him. Your species fascinates us, Marcus. You have achieved remarkable technological advancement while maintaining a capacity for individual kindness that many civilizations lose as they evolve. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to absorb the magnitude of what he was hearing. You're telling me that our entire future was decided because I gave you coffee and listened to you vent about work? Partially, yes. But also because you demonstrated something my advisor's reports could not capture. You showed me that humanity possesses what we call ethical instinct, the automatic impulse to help others without expectation of reward. Lots of people would have done the same thing. Would they? In my experience, most beings, when confronted with something unknown and potentially dangerous, choose caution over kindness. Zeth gestured toward the windows where the lights of the sleeping city twinkled in the distance. Your people have created art that speaks to universal themes of love and loss. You have built societies that, despite their flaws, strive toward justice and equality. Most remarkably, you have individuals like yourself who keep coffee shops open for lonely travelers, asking nothing in return. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the responsibility Zeth was placing on his shoulders. So what happens now? With the contact, I mean? Now comes the difficult part. My decision to engage with humanity was just the beginning. Over the coming months, your leaders and mine will negotiate the terms of Earth's integration into the galactic community. There will be cultural exchanges, technological transfers, and countless opportunities for misunderstanding. And if it goes badly? Then both our species will suffer for it. That is why I returned here tonight. Zeth reached into his coat and withdrew another disc, this one larger and more intricately decorated than the first. I have a proposal for you. Marcus stared at the disc, afraid to touch it. What kind of proposal? The kind that will likely change your life forever. Zeth's expression grew serious. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands both the importance of this moment and the fundamental humanity that made it possible. I need a human advisor who can help me navigate the complexities of your species' politics and culture. You want me to be an alien ambassador? I want you to be yourself, to continue providing the perspective that convinced me humanity was worth saving. Zeth pushed the disc across the table. That is a formal appointment to my personal diplomatic staff. It will grant you access to technologies and knowledge beyond human understanding, but it will also burden you with responsibilities that will affect the future of both our species. Marcus picked up the disc with hands that had steadied now that he had something concrete to focus on. Like the first disc, it warmed to his touch, but this one also seemed to vibrate slightly as if it contained some form of active technology. What exactly would I be doing? Helping me understand humanity. Your people have complexities that our analysis cannot capture. You feel pride and shame in equal measure. You create beauty in the midst of suffering. You simultaneously embrace and fear change. Zeth's eyes fixed on Marcus's face. Most importantly, you possess a capacity for hope that my species lost long ago. We have become efficient, logical, successful, but we have forgotten how to dream of better futures. Marcus thought about his father's cafe, about the legacy of kindness he'd inherited and tried to maintain. And you think I can teach that to an entire civilization? I think you can remind us that it exists. The rest we will have to learn for ourselves. Zeth stood, but this time he didn't move toward the door. I will not pressure you for an immediate answer. This choice must be yours, made freely and with full understanding of its consequences. What about my cafe? My life here? The cafe would survive your absence should you choose to accept. As for your life... Zeth paused, considering his words carefully. It would be transformed beyond recognition. You would see wonders that no human has imagined, participate in decisions that shape the destiny of worlds, and carry knowledge that would burden as much as it enlightens. Marcus looked around his small cafe, taking in the familiar surroundings that had defined his world for the past 2 years. The mismatched furniture, the local artwork, the coffee stains that told stories of thousands of conversations. It was a small life, but it was his life, built on the foundation his father had provided. How long do I have to decide? The diplomatic process will take several weeks to establish formal protocols. I would need your answer within that time frame. Zeth moved toward the door, then stopped. Marcus, whatever you choose, know that your kindness to a stranger has already changed the course of history. That is a legacy worth honoring, regardless of what comes next. After Zeth left, Marcus sat alone in his cafe until dawn, holding the disc and thinking about impossible choices. Outside, the city was waking up to a new world, one where humanity was no longer alone in the universe. News crews were probably setting up outside government buildings, preparing for another day of speculation and uncertainty. But in Murphy's Corner Cafe, a small business owner sat with a cup of cooling coffee and the weight of 2 worlds resting in his palm, trying to decide whether wisdom lay in preserving the life he'd built or in stepping forward into an unknowable future. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks living in 2 worlds simultaneously. During the day, he maintained the familiar rhythms of his cafe, serving coffee to customers who buzzed with excitement about the alien contact. Everyone had theories about the visitor's intentions, opinions about government handling of the situation, and endless questions about what this meant for humanity's future. Marcus listened to it all while knowing more than he could ever reveal. He watched news conferences where government officials carefully parsed every word from the alien delegation, not knowing that their fate had been decided over coffee and late-night conversation. He served reporters who were desperately trying to get closer to the story, unaware that the biggest scoop of their careers was standing behind the counter making their lattes. The metallic disc remained in his pocket, growing warm whenever he touched it, as if responding to his emotional state. He'd studied both discs extensively, discovering that they seemed to react to focused thought and intention. The symbols would shift and flow when he concentrated on them, sometimes forming patterns that almost looked like writing in an alphabet he couldn't read. During the quiet evening hours, Marcus found himself researching everything he could about space, diplomacy, and first contact scenarios. He read science fiction novels and academic papers with equal intensity, trying to prepare himself for a decision he still hadn't made. The rational part of his mind insisted that accepting Zeth's offer was insane. He was a small business owner with a high school education and no experience beyond serving coffee and listening to people's problems. But another part of him, the part that had kept the cafe open past midnight for lonely travelers, recognized something important in what Zeth was offering. The alien emperor wasn't looking for an expert in interstellar relations. He was looking for someone who understood the fundamental human capacity for kindness, someone who could remind an ancient civilization what it meant to hope. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening when Marcus was closing the cafe and found an elderly woman sitting outside in the rain. Mrs. Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was a regular customer who usually came in during the afternoon rush. She looked confused and distressed, clutching a torn photograph to her chest. "Mrs. Chen, are you all right?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside her on the wet sidewalk. "I can't find my way home," she said softly. "Everything looks different now. The buildings are all wrong." Marcus recognized the signs of dementia-related disorientation. Mrs. Chen's family had mentioned her increasing confusion, but she'd always seemed sharp during her cafe visits. Now, however, she appeared completely lost in a world that no longer made sense to her. "It's okay," Marcus said gently. "Let's get you inside where it's warm, and we'll figure this out together." He helped her into the cafe and made her a cup of the sweet tea she preferred while calling her daughter. As they waited for family to arrive, Mrs. Chen showed him the photograph she'd been protecting from the rain. It was an old picture of her late husband, faded and worn from decades of handling. "He used to walk me home from work every evening," she said, her voice distant. 43 years, rain or shine. I keep thinking if I wait long enough, he'll come find me." Marcus sat with her, listening as she told stories about her husband, her family, her life before confusion clouded her memories. He made no attempt to correct her when she spoke about her husband as if he were still alive, understanding that sometimes kindness meant accepting someone else's version of reality rather than imposing your own. When Mrs. Chen's daughter arrived to take her home, she thanked Marcus profusely for taking care of her mother. "She gets confused about time and place, but she never forgets kindness," the daughter explained. "Thank you for seeing her as a person instead of just a problem." After they left, Marcus stood alone in his cafe, understanding something fundamental about his decision. Mrs. Chen hadn't needed expert medical care or professional counseling. She'd needed someone willing to sit with her in her confusion and treat her with dignity. Sometimes the most important help anyone could offer was simply the willingness to care. That night, Marcus made his choice. The next evening, he kept the cafe open past midnight, hoping Zeth would return. His patience was rewarded when the alien emperor arrived just after 1 a.m., moving with the same careful deliberation Marcus had come to recognize. "You have decided," Zeth said as he settled into his corner table. It wasn't a question. "I have." Marcus brought over coffee and the diplomatic disc, setting both on the table between them. "But I have conditions." Zeth's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed?" "First, I keep the cafe. Maybe not as my primary responsibility, but I need to know it'll be here when I need it. This place matters to people, and I won't abandon that." "Understandable. That can be arranged." "Second, I need to know that what we're doing will actually help humanity, not just serve your civilization's interests. I want a voice in decisions that affect my people. You would not be my advisor if I did not value your input on such matters. And third, Marcus paused, gathering his courage, I need to understand what I'm really getting into. No more partial explanations or diplomatic evasions. If I'm going to help you navigate human nature, you need to trust me with the full truth. Zeth was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face. The full truth is more complex than you might expect. My civilization is not the benevolent Galactic Federation your science fiction stories imagine. We are pragmatic, efficient, and often ruthless in pursuit of our goals. We have eliminated poverty, disease, and war within our borders, but we have also eliminated much of what you would recognize as individual freedom. Marcus felt a chill. Are you planning to impose that system on Earth? That is precisely the kind of decision I need human perspective to navigate. My advisors see your planet's inefficiencies and inequalities as problems to be solved through superior technology and organization. They do not understand that those very struggles may be essential to what makes humanity valuable. So you're looking for someone to argue against your own people when necessary? I am looking for someone to remind us all why we chose contact over quarantine in the first place. Zeth leaned forward. Your species possesses something we have lost, Marcus. You still believe in the possibility of becoming better than you are. We achieved perfection and discovered it was a trap. Marcus picked up the diplomatic disc, feeling its weight and warmth. What happens if this doesn't work? If the integration fails? Then both our civilizations will suffer the consequences. Your people will either be absorbed into our system, losing what makes them unique, or they will reject our influence entirely and face the galaxy alone. Neither outcome serves anyone well. And you think one human with a coffee shop can prevent that? I think one human who understands that wisdom comes from unexpected sources might help two civilizations find a path forward that neither could discover alone. Zeth's smile was sad but genuine. I have commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, and ruled 12 star systems. But I have never learned to make coffee for a stranger who needs it or to sit with someone lost in their own confusion without trying to fix them. Marcus thought about Mrs. Chen, about his father's legacy, about all the late-night conversations with people who just needed someone to listen. Maybe Zeth was right. Maybe the skills required for intergalactic diplomacy weren't that different from the ones needed to run a good cafe. All right, Marcus said, closing his fingers around the disc. Let's save 2 worlds. The disc grew warm in his hand, and suddenly the symbols on its surface blazed with soft light. Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if information was flowing directly into his mind. Images flashed before his eyes, vast star maps, alien cities, technologies beyond human comprehension. But underlying it all was something simpler and more profound, a sense of connection to something larger than himself. When the sensation faded, Marcus found himself changed in subtle ways. He could understand the symbols on both discs now, recognizing them as a sophisticated form of communication that combined written language with emotional context. More importantly, he could sense Zeth's thoughts and feelings more clearly, understanding the enormous burden of responsibility the alien emperor carried. The neural interface will allow us to communicate more effectively, Zeth explained. It will also grant you access to our historical databases and cultural archives. You will need that knowledge to understand the context of the decisions we face. Marcus stood up, surprised to find that he felt steadier than expected. The weight of cosmic responsibility that had seemed so overwhelming just moments before now felt manageable, like a challenging but achievable task. When do we start? Immediately. There is a formal diplomatic reception tomorrow evening where you will be introduced to Earth's leadership as my personal cultural advisor. From there, we begin the complex process of building a framework for two civilizations to coexist. And my cafe will remain open, staffed by individuals who understand its importance to the community. You may find, however, that your late-night customers become rather more diverse in the coming months. Marcus laughed, imagining alien diplomats and human politicians sharing coffee and conversation in his small corner cafe. It seemed impossible, but then again, everything about the last few weeks had seemed impossible. "One more question," Marcus said as Zeth prepared to leave. "That first night when you came here, was that really random, or were you already considering me for this role?" "Entirely random. I was indeed seeking sanctuary from the weight of an impossible decision. Your kindness to a stranger convinced me that humanity was worth saving. Everything that followed was a consequence of that choice." Zeth paused at the door. Sometimes the most important moments in history begin with someone simply offering a cup of coffee to someone who needs it. After Zeth left, Marcus began his closing routine one last time as simply the owner of Murphy's Corner Cafe. Tomorrow he would begin a new life as a bridge between two worlds, carrying the hopes and fears of both species into an uncertain future. He turned off the lights and locked the door, but left a small sign in the window. "Sanctuary open at midnight, all species welcome." 3 months later, Murphy's Corner Cafe had become an unofficial embassy where human and alien diplomats met for informal discussions over coffee and pastries. The late-night hours remained Marcus's domain, where he continued to provide refuge for anyone who needed it, whether they were homesick alien traders, overwhelmed human officials, or simply insomniacs seeking a warm place to exist. The integration hadn't been without challenges. Cultural misunderstandings led to diplomatic incidents, technological exchanges created new inequalities, and some humans struggled with the reality that they were no longer alone in the universe. But progress was being made, one conversation at a time. Marcus found himself splitting his time between the cafe and the orbital diplomatic station, using his unique position to help both sides understand each other. He'd discovered that many of the skills he'd developed as a cafe owner, listening without judgment, finding common ground between different perspectives, creating spaces where people felt safe to be vulnerable, translated remarkably well to interstellar diplomacy. On quiet nights, when the cafe was empty except for the soft hum of alien technology integrated seamlessly with human coffee-making equipment, Marcus would think about the chain of events that had led him here. A chance encounter with a lonely stranger had become the foundation for humanity's entry into a larger universe. His father would have appreciated the irony. The old man had always insisted that the most important things in life happened in small spaces between people, in moments of connection that couldn't be planned or predicted. He'd built his cafe on that principle, creating a place where strangers could become friends over shared coffee and conversation. Now that same principle was helping two civilizations learn to trust each other, one cup of coffee at a time. It wasn't the future Marcus had imagined for himself, but it was the one he'd chosen, and he was determined to make it work. After all, as his father used to say, feeding people was the most basic form of taking care of each other. Whether those people happened to be human or alien didn't really change the fundamental equation. The universe, Marcus had learned, was vast and strange and full of wonders beyond imagination. But at its heart, it was made up of individuals who sometimes just needed a warm place to sit and someone willing to listen to their stories. Some things, it turned out, were truly universal.